prayers and eating your vitamins is definitely the right way to live.
I am not the strongest bloke in the room anymore. The roar is still there in my head, but my chest feels tight and the lights are fading. I thought I could push through like I always did. You know, one more time for the crowd. I am sorry for the hurt I caused along the way. Thank you for the love that kept me standing when my knees were shot and my voice was rough. If this is the end, let it carry the good I tried to do, not the noise that followed me. That's how many of us remember Hulk Hogan, born Terry Bollea, the bandana, the mustache, the red and yellow that became a kind of armor for a whole generation. He wasn't just a wrestler. He was a pop culture landmark you could spot from the back row, a Saturday Arvo memory for Aussie kids who learned to cup a hand to their ear and wait for the roof to lift. Across the 80s and 90s, he turned spectacle into a language we all understood, a promise that the music would hit and the comeback would land. But behind the poses and the poses that broke the dial, there was a complicated man who kept trying to reinvent himself as the world changed around him. He climbed, he fell, he tried again. If this story has touched a part of your own growing up, jump in the comments and tell us your favorite moment. And if you want more long-form, honest takes like this, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next chapter. Because with Hogan, there's always another chapter hiding behind the curtain, and, honestly, it's not all bright lights and easy endings. Well, trace the path from Tampa Dreams to global icon. Then, through the hard bits most people prefer to skip, the surgeries and the silence between appearances. The legal fights that shook the media, the words that cost him trust, and the long road back to a kind of acceptance. We'll talk about family and the weight of legacy, about the mourning that left fans in shock, and the way a bell can toll on live television and still make a stadium hold its breath. Not to judge, not to gawk, but to sit with the truth of a man who made millions feel 10 feet tall, even for a minute. This is a story about fame, pain, and the stubborn human urge to make things right before the lights drop for good. Stay with me as we step into the world that built the legend and the country that watched him grow. In the next part, we set the scene and feel the temperature of the era that made Hulkamania possible. The sun over Florida always seemed to burn a bit harder, and that's where the story begins to stretch between legend and reality. Back in the day, before the arenas, before the heavy riffs of Real American became an anthem, Terry Bollea was just another bloke chasing a sound. He played bass in small bars, sweating under cheap lights, trying to find rhythm in life, before he ever threw a punch in the ring. It was the 70s, and fame felt like something that belonged to someone else. Then, a local promoter spotted the size of him, the arms, the jaw, the way he filled a doorway, and whispered the word that would change everything: wrestling. And that's how the world began to build Hulk Hogan out of a quiet musician from Tampa Bay. You could say the transformation was part theater, part miracle. By the early 80s, that name wasn't just a name. It was a roar. When you talk to Aussies who grew up watching Saturday morning TV, there's this spark in their eyes. They remember Hogan flexing against the bright blue ropes, shouting about vitamins and believing in yourself. It sounds simple now, but for kids growing up on the other side of the world, it was a kind of permission to dream big. He wasn't just a fighter, he was a teacher in neon colors, yelling over the noise, telling you to keep fighting when life threw you down. That's why his image stuck so deep here. He made the distance between America and Australia feel smaller, like we were all part of the same loud family under the same flashing lights. Of course, fame is a heavy costume. The more he wore it, the more it started to wear him. By the mid-90s, the roar that built him began to echo back. The body that once seemed indestructible started to crack under the years of landing flat on hardwood. Surgery after surgery, bone after bone, and still he'd walk out to the music, pretending nothing hurt. There was money, there was glory, but there was also the strange loneliness of being an icon. Every smile felt rehearsed, every handshake a performance. Maybe that's what started the chain of mistakes. When you can't tell where the character ends and the person begins. When the camera lights fade, the quiet is the loudest thing in the room. Hogan had to face that. The scandals, The private calls that became headlines, the words that broke hearts. And yet, even then, Australia still tuned in. Because somewhere beneath the layers of showmanship, people recognized something familiar, a flawed man trying to make sense of what Head built. We've all seen mates fall from grace, and we've all watched them try to climb back. There's something heartbreakingly human about it. Maybe that's why, when news of his passing hit in July 2025, people here didn't just see a headline, they saw a piece of their own youth closing its eyes. In the next part, we step into that middle space, where fame turns to fatigue, where heroes become men again, and where the story of Hulk Hogan stops being about wrestling and starts being about survival. It's not all muscle and medals. It's about how far you can fall and still find the strength to get up. There's a moment every performer faces when the cheers start to fade, and you can almost hear your own heartbeat behind the noise. For Hulk Hogan, that moment didn't come with a sudden crash. It was slower, quieter, like sand slipping through his fingers. By the early 2000s, the world that once idolized him had changed. The kids who chanted his name were now adults chasing their own lives, and the new era of entertainment didn't need a hero in yellow and red anymore. But Hogan, he couldn't just walk away. He was built on stage lights and crowd energy. Without it, he wasn't sure who he was. That's what fame does to you. It blurs the edges until you start mistaking applause for love. And maybe that's why he kept showing up, even when his body screamed at him to stop. There were surgeries too many to count. Spinal fusions, knee replacements, little scars that mapped out the cost of being indestructible. Friends would later say he looked tired, but would never admit it. He'd still show up at conventions, smiling for photos, gripping fans' hands with that same crushing handshake. To the world, he was still the Hulkster. To those close to him, he was Terry, just a man waking up in pain, trying to stretch out enough to stand tall for one more day. And every night, when He'd sit down in the dark living room of his Clearwater home, surrounded by memorabilia and the soft hum of old promos playing on loop, He'd whisper the question that haunted so many stars before him: what happens when the character outlives the man? Then came the moments that tore the curtain down. The leaked tapes, the words said in private that made the public turn away. He lost contracts, friends, and something even more valuable: trust. The man who once told millions of kids to believe found himself asking if there was still something left worth believing in. For a while, he disappeared. He didn't post, didn't talk, didn't fight back. Just retreated into silence. In interviews years later, He'd admit that those quiet months were the hardest. Not because of the world's judgment, but because of the mirror. You see yourself, he once said, and sometimes you don't like who's looking back. That's not the bravado of Hulk Hogan talking. That's Terry, stripped bare, coming to terms with the man underneath the myth. But redemption has a strange way of sneaking up on people. In 2018, WWE brought him back cautiously, quietly. The same stage that once cast him out now gave him a second chance. Some fans forgave him, others didn't. But the moment he stepped through the curtain again, head slightly bowed, the old music playing, there was something different in his eyes. He wasn't the larger-than-life warrior anymore. He was an old soldier returning to the battlefield, not to conquer, but to say goodbye properly. That's the thing about aging in public: you don't get to choose your final act. The audience does. And somehow, that night, they chose grace. In Australia, fans felt it too. Wrestling here has always had this strange, loyal following. People remember staying up late to catch American matches, watching Hogan tear his shirt in half while commentators lost their minds. So when the news came that He'd been invited back to the Hall of Fame after all those years, local outlets covered it like a cultural comeback. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about recognizing the whole story, scars and all. That's something Australians understand. We love a redemption arc, the battler who stumbles but stands up again, dusts off, and says, "All right, let's try that one more time." But even as the cheers returned, his body kept failing him. Years of punishment can't be undone by applause. In 2025, when he went in for another surgery on his neck, doctors warned him it was serious. He joked about it online, said he'd walk out stronger, maybe even ready for one last promo. But privately, he was scared. Friends say he'd grown quiet, reflective, he'd talk about his kids more, about faith, about what really matters when the cameras are gone. It wasn't the voice of a showman anymore. It was a man counting the good days he had left. He started writing notes, messages to people he cared about, thoughts about mistakes he couldn't fix. Not letters of farewell exactly, but reflections, like he was building a little peace before the end. Then came July. A quiet morning in Clearwater. The kind of Florida day where the air feels heavy even before sunrise. He was found unresponsive not long after dawn. The news broke fast. ABC, BBC, every outlet around the world ran the headline. In Australia, it trended for 2 days straight. Fans posted clips, tributes, old posters from their childhood rooms. Some wrote about how they used to imitate him with their siblings, others about how his goofy confidence helped them through tough times. That's the strange magic of nostalgia. It turns strangers into family for a moment. Hogan's passing wasn't just another celebrity death here. It was the closing of a chapter many Aussies didn't realize they were still holding on to. In the next part, we'll look deeper into the aftermath, the will, the family, the arguments, and the whispers that followed his funeral. Because even in death, Hulk Hogan's story kept unfolding, tangled between grief, legacy, and the search for peace he'd chased his whole life. The days that followed were strange, heavy, and loud in the quietest way. Clearwater became the center of the world again, but this time for reasons no one wanted. Reporters camped outside the gates, fans left flowers and bandanas at the driveway, and the sun, merciless as ever, beat down on a house that suddenly felt smaller than the legend it had held. Inside, the family gathered, stunned by the finality of it all. There were tears, of course, but also confusion. Paperwork, lawyers, statements. That's the part people never see. You know, the mess of grief mixed with signatures and phone calls. And then came the thing that caught everyone off guard: the will. According to court filings in Florida, Hogan left an estate worth around $5 million. For a man who once earned more than entire rosters of wrestlers combined, it seemed modest, but the surprise wasn't the number, it was the name. The sole beneficiary listed was his son, Nick Hogan. No mention of Brooke. None. The tabloids tore into it. Headlines called it a snub, a mystery, even a final punishment. But those who had followed the family knew it wasn't that simple. Brooke had spoken in the past about her wish to stay out of her father's spotlight, about how fame had pulled their family apart. Some sources close to her said she'd asked to be removed from the will years before, a choice made to avoid legal chaos. Whether that's true or not, the omission left fans speculating for weeks. Every outlet in America and Australia seemed to have a theory. And then there was the question of the crypto wallet, $200,000 in digital assets, unclaimed, floating somewhere in cyberspace. Lawyers argued over passwords, recovery phrases, and the right to access. It was the kind of bizarre 21st century problem that only added to the surrealness of it all. But behind the numbers and the headlines, there was something more haunting: the sense that Hogan had been trying to put his world in order before the end. The notes found in his study weren't dramatic farewells, just quiet reflections. One line, reportedly written a week before he died, read, "I am tired of fighting my own story." Simple, but it hit hard. After a lifetime of battles, both staged and real, he wanted peace more than anything. The wrestling world moved fast. WWE held a tribute episode that Friday night. 10 bells echoed through the arena before the opening match, a sound that made even hardened fans tear up. Old rivals sent messages, some awkward, some heartbreakingly sincere. The montage that played across the big screen showed him tearing his shirt, pointing to the sky, flexing one last time. The crowd didn't chant his name this time. They just stood, heads bowed, remembering. For many Aussies who stayed up to watch the broadcast live, it was like saying goodbye to a piece of their childhood. Social media in Australia lit up with clips. From old WrestleMania matches to goofy movie cameos, people weren't talking about scandal or lawsuits anymore. They were sharing memories. The way he made them laugh. The way he made them believe. But behind that public wave of nostalgia, there was tension. Melanie Sky Daly, Hogan's widow, became the reluctant center of attention. She'd married him quietly, away from the cameras, and now found herself at the heart of a legal and emotional storm. Some relatives questioned her influence, some defended her fiercely. Brooke kept silent for days before finally breaking it with a simple Instagram post. A photo of her and her dad at a beach years ago, captioned with a single line, "Ill, always be your little girl." That one sentence silenced a lot of the noise. It reminded everyone that beyond the bright lights and the tabloid headlines, this was still a family mourning a man they loved, however imperfectly. The story took another turn when rumors surfaced about a possible malpractice suit. Reports suggested Hogan's family was considering legal action against the hospital where his final surgery took place. Complications, delays, missed signs, no official statement confirmed it, but whispers spread fast. Talk shows debated it, tabloids speculated, and fans dissected every medical report leaked online. Yet in the middle of all that chatter, what people seemed to want most wasn't scandal, it was closure. For decades, Hulk Hogan's life had been played out like a soap opera. Every triumph, every fall, every confession. This time, fans hoped the curtain could finally close without another act. Australia kept the tribute alive longer than most places. Radio hosts reminisced about meeting him during promotional tours in Sydney and Melbourne, and old VHS footage of his charity visits resurfaced online. There was this clip, him holding a small kid with a toy belt, laughing, saying, "You're the champ now, brother." It went viral again, pulling 500,000 views in a week. That's the thing about figures like Hogan, they never truly disappear. They linger in our memories, in pop culture, in the parts of ourselves that once believed in larger-than-life heroes. The legacy he left was messy, but undeniably human. A man who made mistakes, owned some, denied others, and somehow still managed to inspire millions. Maybe that's why Australians felt such a connection to him. We get the idea of the flawed hero, the bloke who tries, stumbles, and tries again. It's something deeply relatable, something that sits right at the heart of how we tell stories here. And when the final bell rang for Hulk Hogan, it wasn't just an ending. It was a reminder that even legends crave forgiveness, and that sometimes peace doesn't come from perfection but from acceptance. In the next part, we'll step away from the headlines and talk about what he really meant to people, the lessons, the laughter, and the strange comfort his story still brings to those who grew up watching him. Because behind all the noise, there's still a heartbeat in the myth of Hulk Hogan. When the storm of headlines finally started to settle, what remained was something softer, almost tender. People weren't arguing anymore about wills or scandals. They were remembering, in Australia, that memory carried a particular warmth. For a generation that grew up on Saturday morning wrestling shows, Hogan wasn't just a performer, he was a ritual. Kids would huddle in front of boxy TVs, cereal bowls in hand, and wait for the moment the music hit. It didn't matter that the moves were staged or that the villains always lost. What mattered was how it made you feel powerful, invincible, alive for a few minutes before the weekend chores began. That's the legacy he left behind here. He was never just an American star, he was part of our childhood rhythm. What's interesting is how time reshapes people. After his passing, older fans started sharing memories online, but the tone wasn't blind adoration anymore. It was gratitude mixed with realism. Comments read like small confessions. "He wasn't perfect, but he made me believe in something," or "My dad used to watch him with me. It's why I love wrestling." That's the thing about heroes, they outlive their own reputations. They fade, get reinterpreted, softened by nostalgia. And maybe that's the best kind of immortality a celebrity can hope for. Not statues or trophies, but a quiet place in the collective memory of people who needed them at some point. WWE eventually announced that a section of the Hall of Fame museum would be dedicated solely to Hogan, not just his championship belts, but letters from fans, charity photos, and a looping video of his old interviews. It wasn't a glorification, it was reflection. Even the wording of the plaque was different, simple, almost humble. It called him a man who defined an era and lived every inch of it. That line captured something true. His story wasn't about perfection, it was about persistence. And persistence in any form is something Australians respect deeply. For many of us, hearing that 10-bell salute still stings a bit. Maybe because it feels like losing a small piece of youth, maybe because it reminds us that the icons who raised us weren't superhuman after all. They aged, hurt, and tried to find their own peace just like the rest of us. And that, in a way, makes their stories more meaningful. Because behind the muscles and the theatrics, Hogan was just a bloke trying to hold on to purpose in a world that kept moving faster than he could keep up with. In the final part, we'll step back one last time not to mourn, but to look at what remains when the lights go out and the crowd has gone home, because somewhere in that silence lies the truest part of his legacy. It's strange how silence can speak louder than applause. After the crowds faded and the tributes slowed down, what lingered wasn't the noise of fame, but the quiet reflection of what had meant to so many. For years, Hulk Hogan was a symbol of strength, the guy who could lift giants, tear shirts, and shout about belief like it was a religion. But in the end, the thing people remembered most wasn't the power, it was the perseverance. The man who kept showing up, even when life kept knocking him down. That's something Australians understand deep in their bones. We know about getting back up after a rough hit, about standing tall even when no one's watching. When you look at Hogan's story now, it feels less like a cautionary tale and more like a mirror. It's about ambition, ego, redemption, and the long road back to humility. There were mistakes that can't be erased, things said that still sting, but there was also growth, a man learning, however late, that the crowd's love can't heal everything. What does heal, sometimes, is forgiveness from others, from yourself, and that's maybe the quiet victory he found in his final years. A kind of peace, earned not through triumph, but through letting go. In the months after his death, the world didn't forget him. His name kept echoing through arenas, documentaries, podcasts, and even classrooms talking about the nature of fame. In Australia, old fans passed the stories down to their kids, showing them clips, explaining how once upon a time, there was a man who made the whole world believe in heroes. It's almost poetic, the way a larger-than-life figure can end up teaching something so small and human. That being strong isn't about muscles or victory speeches. It's about showing up when it hurts, about facing your mistakes head-on, and still daring to love yourself through it. Maybe that's what makes the memory of Hulk Hogan endure, not the perfection but the imperfection. He lived loud, fell hard, and left behind a trail of contradictions that somehow feel deeply real. And when people talk about him now, there's less judgment, more understanding. He was one of us, really flawed, stubborn, endlessly trying to be better. The legend and the man finally became one. So when the final bell rings and the lights dim for good, what's left isn't the roar. It's the echo, the one that reminds us of Saturday mornings, old TV screens, and the feeling of believing that good could win, even for a little while. Maybe that's the truest peace a man like Hulk Hogan could ever find.